Good morning.
Good
Good morning.
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. I'm so excited. And the numbers just keep climbing. This is wonderful. Um, my name is Dr. Johanna Rogers. I'm Senior Vice President for Racial Equity and Social Inclusion here at Center State CEO. Welcome to our Women in Community Engagement panel in honor of Women's History Month. Last week we celebrated International Women's Day, so a belated happy International Women's Day to everyone. But also this is a continuation of work that we've started. We see these panels as an opportunity to bring the community together to learn about key issues, think about equity in different ways, and walk away with some type of understanding, tool, nugget, information that can help you think about how equity is showing up within your organization. So thank you for showing up today. Before we get started, I would like to welcome and acknowledge our sponsors, Berkshire Bank, and we have a special guest with us today, Angela Dixon, who's the Chief Diversity Officer, Senior Vice President, Chief Diversity Officer for Berkshire Bank. And so I asked everyone to give Angela a warm welcome, and she just has a few words for us. Angela.
Thank you, Johanna, and good morning, everyone. What a time this is for women, I must say. As Johanna mentioned, I'm Angela Dixon, the Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Berkshire Bank. Our mission is to be a high-performing, leading, socially responsible community bank in New England and in upstate New York, and we are simply honored to be a sponsor for today's conversation on women in community engagement. In 2022, we launched the Center for Women Wellness and Wealth, recognizing the importance of supporting women in prioritizing our physical and mental well-being while taking control of our financial lives. These aspects really do go hand in hand. Statistically, we know that there are several key factors that tend to be prevalent in the lives of women, many of whom have been married will face widowhood and in fact, the average age of such in the US is 59 years of age. So it's important to note also that 98% of widows and divorcees advise other women to take a more active role in their financial lives in order to improve their long-term financial security. Another factor facing working women is pay equity, where white women on average earn 82 cents for every dollar earned by white men, and Black women earn even less, around 65 cents. These earnings impact on our retirement savings, investments, home ownerships, and so on and so forth. The center focuses on providing resources and opportunities to support greater work-life balance, shoring up one's financial wellness as we continue to weather the only constant, change. According to a recent McKinsey study, the top 3 priorities for women in the workplace are flexibility, work-life balance, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And clearly 40% of women leaders are twice as likely to spend time on DE&I than our male counterparts. And studies have proven that DE&I has a positive impact on employee engagement and retention. And quite frankly, women are more likely to leave the workforce or change employment due to a lack of flexible work options and promotional opportunities. So this morning's session will provide an opportunity for a critical conversation on mobilizing equity within our organizations to achieve sustainable impact. There are a very diverse slate of speakers this morning who are sure to provide several actionable ideas and critical insights. I want to acknowledge members of Berkshire's Power Women Employee Resource Group who are in the audience today, and a special shout out to our colleague, Jennifer Hunt. It is a privilege to work with such a powerful group of women who give their very best every day for our customers, our champions of equity and inclusion, and service and volunteerism in communities across our footprint. Thank you, Dr. Johanna Rogers, who serves as the Senior Vice President of Racial Equity and Social Impact, and the entire team at Center State CEO. We thank you for your leadership and your partnership. This is certainly to be an engaging conversation. Please enjoy the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. It is an honor and privilege to be in company with all of you today. We have a dynamic opportunity, and this is the third year we've hosted this session, and each year I walk away feeling empowered, rejuvenated, and almost renewed. Because as I look across the screen, there's many faces here that I know, some that I don't. And as I do that, I'm reminded to ask folks, if you are in a safe space, if you are willing to do so, please cut your cameras on. It's always great to have these conversations and see the faces and reactions. We want the session to be engaging. It will be engaging. But it's also really motivating when you're on here and you're seeing who's on behind the Black screens, right? And so if you're at your desk, this won't be your typical show up and just listen type of session. We really want to get you engaged. And so in order to do that, I was like, who is in our network? Who is out there in the world doing this work in different ways? And how can we bring them together for a dynamic, inspiring moment in March for women? Women leaders, women who are aspiring to be leaders, women who are within their organizations, or our allies, right? Folks who are like, how do we empower the women that are working with us in our communities and around us? How do we let them know that what they're doing and how they show up and everything that we are bringing to the office every morning? All of those things matter and shape who we are and shape our ability to lead in unique ways, right? And I think each March we try to find a way to honor that work. And today we're talking about the power of community engagement. When I think about equity, when I think about what has historically changed the realities of women every day, and not just our country, but around the world, it's been our ability to convene groups to support initiative, whether it's supporting children, whether it's thinking about schooling in the community, if we're thinking about pay equity, if we're thinking about voting rights, if we're thinking about bettering our community. It has been the ability of women to organize and gather in spaces, right? That has driven a lot of change in this country and the world over. And it's not often talked about, but as I thought about the dynamic women in my life, they're not just great employees, but they're involved in their school board. They are on community organization boards. They are leading different efforts for their kids in the classroom. They are thinking about what committees are needed at work to create a different type of experience for themselves or other employees. They are often spending their Saturday or Sunday mornings doing community projects to beautify or expose girls to STEM, or think about different needs within the library system or various other things. And it has been in those spaces where we create networks, we support one another, we can empower one another, but we don't often talk about that work in a way that resounds like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so today I have asked a group of panelists to join us that will help deepen our understanding of that work, remind us as to why this work is important and how it transforms community, and also give us a little bit of wisdom or some tips on how we can take some of the work that they're leading and doing and the impact that it's making and bring it back into our organization, or even use it as a way to talk about the work that you're doing, maybe in the office or outside of it. For our allies that may be on the phone, or to the men in the room, I think this is an opportunity to listen and hear and understand in a more in-depth way how women are showing up, showing out oftentimes, right? But thinking about the community as a whole, right? In many ways, and the work that we often do isn't just about doing the work. Oftentimes there's a passion project in that work for us. And how do we bring those passion projects to life within our environment, or at least strive to? Sometimes it's a challenge, right? We all aren't in the most ideal situations. And maybe some of us are showing up looking for some empowerment today because you're thinking about doing something different or wanting to take that risk and advocating for something that you might find to be more supportive or needed or necessary within your workplace. And I think that some of the conversation in the panelists that we have here today will help you do that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. And then what we've asked them to do is take a couple of minutes, each of them to share with you who they are, what type of work they're leading, and how this idea of community engagement has informed their career as well as their aspirations. Dr. Simone Seward, she is the director of the Center for Civic Engagement. She is an instructor for curriculum development up at Upstate Medical University. I've known Simone for a number of years. I met her in my first role here in Syracuse about 7 years ago, where I hosted a number of her students from Upstate, as well as Syracuse University too, I believe, in my office at the Southwest Community Center. I often say Simone was a staple in me finishing my PhD, and now recently, congratulations to her because she has just graduated with her PhD in public health from the University of Albany. And so congratulations, Simone, and her research focus is around health and equity outcomes within maternal child care health, right? So welcome, Simone. Next on our panel, we have Dr. Sarah Jefferis. She is the founder and CEO of Right Now. She's a poet, author, editor. She also teaches creative writing at Cornell University. She holds multiple degrees from Hollins University, an MFA in poetry from Cornell, and a PhD in creative writing from SUNY Binghamton. Through her business Right Now, she serves as an editor for innovative leaders who need assistance at any stage of their project and across multiple disciplines and genres. Sarah, I'll also add, does a phenomenal job of working with diverse women and helping them find their voice and put their work in the world. So thank you, Sarah, for being here and the work that you're leading. Last but certainly not least, we have Leticia J. Spencer. She's president of the New Jersey chapter of American Association of Blacks in Energy. She's a graduate of St. Vincent's Academy in New Jersey. She earned her Associates of Arts in Computer Information Systems from a community college and then went on to graduate from Montclair State University in New Jersey in 2008 with a bachelor's in communications. Leticia is also a recent graduate of Syracuse University with her graduate degree in applied data science. She is a woman that is not only blazing a trail in the field of energy, but is also helping others find their path as well. And so I would like to welcome her to the panel as well. We have the opportunity to think about the work that's being led in a number of different ways. Angela pointed some of these out, but when we think about what needs to happen or the conversation around women in the workplace, there's all different types of matters that are affecting us. Family, right, discrimination, the lack of representation of others that look like us in our field, right? Our ability to lead is often contextualized and centered around gender stereotypes, right? And that also leads to an underrepresentation of women in leadership because sometimes we just burn out, right? We burn out because we're trying to show up and do many things within our organization. And so I'm gonna ask Amina to take the PowerPoint down. I have spoken enough. I'm going to ask our esteemed panelists to offer some of their thoughts and wisdoms around how they're navigating in their workspace, how they find the motivation, and how they're turning their passion and their motivation also into efforts that engage the community around their work. And so we're going to start off with Dr. Simone Seward and then go down the line. And so good morning, Simone. And I'm going to hand it over to you. If in 1 second, for all of the women in the chat, if you were comfortable doing so, I'm going to ask you to just put a word or a sentence in the chat about what you're hoping to get from today's session while we begin to hear from our panelists. So if you'll drop a word or a sentence or a couple of lines in the chat about what you're hoping to get out of today's session, that would be amazing. And now, Simone.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you all today. It's been really an honor to even have been asked. So thank you, Dr. Rogers. Thank you to Center State, Berkshire Bank, everyone who has facilitated this session and has been involved in the planning process. So again, thank you. So I just have a few slides that I want to share with you, and I love the chat energy. I love energy, and I appreciate Dr. Rogers asking for cameras to be turned on, because I also feed off of your energy and the smiles and the faces that I see and the nodding. That also helps to encourage the dialogue and the conversation. So again, thank you to those who have put their comments in the chat, inspiration and guidance. Thank you. So as Dr. Rogers mentioned, I am a health equity researcher and public health practitioner. I have had over 15 years of training and community engagement experiences working at various levels of government, federal, state, local, as well as a stint in the private sector as a healthcare consultant. And most recently, my current position within academia, where I've engaged with communities ever since I came to Syracuse, really. I actually moved here from Florida in July of 2008. And one of my ways of really getting to know the community is through volunteerism and getting to know the lay of the land and understanding who the key players are. So I started that even before I had a job at Upstate. That's just my way of getting to know the community, because I have moved around a lot, and in all of my efforts and all of my jobs that I've had, community engagement has always been paramount in terms of understanding, who the key players are, what a lay of the land is, because again, no community is ever the same. So I had to learn, how to network, both professionally and socially. And I've actually over the years come to divide or kind of categorize myself as both from my professional identity side and my social identity side. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's important to me. But first and foremost, most of the work that I do is centered on health equity and really looking to specifically eliminate and hopefully reduce and eliminate racial disparities in birth outcomes by using community-engaged research. And I like to call myself a mixed methodologist. I value the quantitative data, which gives the specific numbers, but also for me, it's very important to then understand the stories behind the numbers and what those stories tell and the reasons for why those numbers are the way they are. And through health equity research, we're able to then ascertain what are some of the solutions, community-driven solutions and community-led solutions that can be employed in order to advance health equity. So my research project, both for my dissertation, but research that I'm continuing in my career as a health researcher at an academic institution, is really to examine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the birth outcomes for women who gave birth and were pregnant during the pandemic in our county, and then using those findings to then translate into public health practice, but also how can we improve clinical practice, understanding the mistrust and the distrust that Black women in particular have of the medical system, and how we can help to improve birth outcomes. So that's my professional identity. So in terms of my social identity, I am a Black woman. I am a wife. I am a mother of 3 beautiful Black children. I am also an immigrant. I immigrated from Suriname, which is in South America, when I was 16. So I was, literally transplanted into Brooklyn, New York in November 13th of 1993. It was a cold day that I have never experienced, but I ended up in Syracuse, New York also. So that's a whole nother story. I'm also a socially trained extrovert. And I say that because at heart, I'm really an introvert. I like to kind of be secluded and by myself. But because of my work and because of community engagement and my training over time, I've actually come to value and really appreciate connecting with people, because again, that also helps to fuel my energy. And I talk about my social identity separate from my professional identity, because I think my social identity gives me a unique perspective in how I come to my research, come to understand the community and how the community informs my research. So that is an aspect that for me is very critically important. And in public health, the work and training that we do requires community engagement, but community engagement strategies look different. And community engagement for me also requires perspective taking. And I personally love this quote and this picture that says, just because you're right doesn't mean I'm wrong. You haven't seen life from my side. And this is one of the things that I work with my students to understand, is being able to have this ability to take perspective and engage with the community to learn what life is like for them, and not just assume or make assumptions about, oh, this is how it must be because this is how it worked in another community. This is the experience I had in this community, so it must be the same in this community. So really getting them to understand why community engagement is so important, and also incorporates the work that I do. One of the things that I talk about a lot, and especially with my students, when they're like, oh, Dr. Seward, I want to go out and volunteer. I want to go out and do this. I want to go out and serve. And I'm like, hold up, wait a minute. We first need to prepare to engage. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you need to understand yourself. You need to know yourself. You have to understand your positionality and the power that we hold when we're entering into these spaces in order to effectively engage with the community. And I'll talk a little bit about specifically the power aspect, because that sometimes gets lost. So we also talk a lot about what biases might you be bringing to the community based on the single narratives that you might have heard. Sometimes we hear, oh, Syracuse is the #1 leading in poverty or child poverty. And we're like, I don't know if I want to go there. I don't want to live there. Some people are like, well, I'm going to go and fix the community. I'm going to go save them. And that might not be the approach to take. So you have to be able to engage with the community to understand the other narratives and the other perspectives that are also very valid. And this quote, I usually reflect on too. And again, when you're thinking about community engagement and who holds the power and what is that power used for, right? So this is a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that says, power is the ability to achieve a purpose, whether or not it's good or bad depends on the purpose. And I think a lot of times when we think about power, at least from a public health perspective, it's us coming in as public health practitioners and say, you, the community, you need to do this. And the data says that you have high rates of diabetes and you have high rates of high blood pressure, and you need to do this in order to ameliorate that, but not really taking a step back to looking at, okay, what are the power dynamics at play and why would the community even listen to us? So I try to use and shift the power dynamics really to the community and positioning them as the expert when engaging in order to achieve health equity. And this slide is a little busy, but I wanted to kind of highlight from the work that I do and the way that we go about, or I go about thinking about power as in a structural way, understanding that, power historically has shaped a lot of the social and environmental conditions that many of our communities see themselves in. So how can we start to even shift that power and give the community the power to act and to lead? So in my research, I tend to take a person-centered approach. And for the research that I'm doing now, which is really policy-driven, so hopefully using the information to be able to inform policies and practices in the long term, I was very intentional with understanding how these COVID-19 policies and pandemic-related policies affected the community in terms of, women's experiences and their birth outcomes. So I had two levels of community engagement that really informed both my research, my methodology, who I recruited, and then who I was able to then actually talk to in order to get this really critical information. Again, having the stories behind the numbers. And then here's where my social identity really played a critical role, because in terms of my recruitment process, I was able to reach out to my network and my social and professional network for recruiting participants to find these participants. And if you'll notice from the chart, most of my participants came from my social network. My professional network, helped a little bit, but it was because of the connections and the networks that I built over time through community engagement that I was able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm doing this research. I really want to understand. And I was able to recruit over 25 women who were willing to not only share their stories with me, but for some women, they're like, you know what, this is the first time we've even been asked about our experiences, during the pandemic. So thank you. So that was also really helpful for me to hear. And again, being able to shift the power to changing the narratives about what women's experiences were during the pandemic, pregnant women especially. So just a couple of nuggets from lessons learned over time. Community engagement really is necessary in order to develop and build credibility, trustworthiness, power dynamics, but also allows you to walk in humility, right? Understanding that you don't know it all. You have to be able to learn from the community. Again, having a person-centered participatory approach, building networks through your social identities, forming relationships, long-term relationships, not just when you need something. And then representation matters on research teams, and that's a whole nother conversation. But again, understanding that community engagement is both a process and an outcome. So with that, I will stop sharing. I know I ran through that really quickly.
I don't know about anybody else, but I took a lot of notes. I see the points in the chat. I love the point about the social and professional identity. I think you just solved a lot of my anxiety. I often feel like, how do I show up as that whole person? And sometimes who we are at work doesn't necessarily reflect who we are outside of that space. And trying to manage both those things on top of children or like your mother, anyway, right? Like all those things play into it. So I thought that was really a powerful way to start the conversation. And I have a lot more notes, and I tried to highlight some things in the chat, but then I started taking my own. Others are there with me. We're gonna come back for questions and answers, but we got limited time, and so I want to give our other panelists the opportunity to do just as well as you just did, Simone. And so Leticia Spencer, good morning, and thank you for joining us. Talk to us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and how community engagement is informing your work.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, ladies, allies, everyone. First of all, thank you, Center State, for bringing this platform for us to discuss this important topic, because there's a lot of times we don't necessarily have space to share on topics like this. We have to hold it in. Thank you, Dr. Johanna Rogers, for inviting me to the stage and platform. Thank you to Berkshire Bank for sponsoring this event. And thank you to my wonderful panelists. I have a book full of notes already, and we just got started. So I wanted to start this. Obviously, I've been introduced. My name is Leticia Spencer. I am the president of the New Jersey Association of Blacks in Energy, the New Jersey chapter. And the American Association of Blacks in Energy has about 39 chapters across 6 different regions in the US. And I wanted to take a step back because not only, I have my school educational identity, which, and thank you, Dr. Seward, for, separating the professional identity and the social identity and trying to authentically be yourself and bring that to the floor and merge all of who you are and try not to compartmentalize part of who you are for the purposes of the environment you're in. So taking a step back of how I actually got involved with AIDS, since I've been involved since about 2010. And this chapter was created in New Jersey in 1997. And so that's 25 years. In 25 years, I am the first and only woman president, Black woman president of the New Jersey chapter, which is an honor, but also it has been a very saddening realization that in 25 years, we're just now having a woman in leadership for the New Jersey chapter. So it always made me think of how I got here, why I got here, and just the word of networking, because as it was already stated, networking plays an important role in professional careers, in social careers, and educationally. When you decide to do things, you look to your networks in order to move forward in how you want to take your path. And what I started to think about is we believe that our networks start we think that it starts when we join a job. We think it starts when we join college. And what I'm here to encourage you and push the envelope in is that networking is actually a cycle that happens all throughout life. And I think at times we just don't think of networking from that aspect. So what happens? You're born, your parents or guardians, what do? They have play dates. They have neighbor play dates, baby play dates, cousin play dates, whoever. We have these play dates, not realizing that is the beginning of our networking journey. Our cousins, our neighbors, our friends, we take that to school. When we start school, we're in school with some of possibly the same kids from our neighborhood. Or, we have churches, or, if you have religious backgrounds, or even just community organizations that you're a part of as a child, whether it's, Boys and Girls Club, whether it's being a Girl Scout. Those are some of your networks too. And how can we talk about community engagement and professional engagement without talking about some of these cycles that happen in our life that we may not necessarily label or pay attention to? Moving forward, we are playing with kids in the middle school playground. We go to high school, we have high school sports, we have elementary sports. We get to college, we have to do the dreaded group projects. These are your networks. These are the ones that you reach back out to. Then what happens? We hopefully get our first job, our first professional job, and then we sit and say, well, what do we do now? Sometimes we may join large organizations where we're looking around, and sometimes we don't see others that look like us. Sometimes we do, but we don't always have the tie-in to say, well, who do I lean on? Who do I reach out to? Who do I have advice? Who do I get advice from? So this cycle actually is more of a spiral, but I wanted to kind of start with the first professional job and how I actually got to ABE as an organization. So I spent over 16 and a half years in the energy industry in various roles, various management roles, analyst roles, customer service roles. And the energy industry, when I joined, and still is a little bit today, a very male-dominated industry. And when I got there, I looked around and saw individuals like me. However, the leadership at the top did not look like me. And I had aspirations in my professional and life and goals. And I started to wonder, who do I reach out to? Who do I talk to? Which is how I found the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And that started my internal network within the energy industry. And it intertwined with what I was doing within the organization that I was part of, as well as what I was doing outside, because we had resource groups within the organization, which merged and it provided a network of those that I can speak to, those that I can ask questions to, those that could help me along my path, as well as now, almost 11 years later, going backwards, I can also pull from side to side, pull up, pull down, and be able to share some of those best practices, spaces to talk, spaces to move on. And just remembering that the networking doesn't start when you first get into that job, being able to reach out to those networks that you built along your life. Because the way I got into the energy industry was because of a childhood friend just saying, hey, you should apply for this job. I don't work there anymore, but I used to work there. And now I still know individuals that work in that area, in that field. So maybe you should reach out. I did just that based upon my childhood network. And 16 years later, I stayed in the energy field. And part of that is when I started in that field, most of us know, we know someone comes out to read the meter so that we can turn on the lights and possibly turn on the heat. And that's all I knew when I started. And it was this network of this association and this professional environment that allowed me to learn and also get more involved with my community, because it all kind of circles back. Your professional community, your growing up community that you live in, and then giving back to the community that you're a part of, because we can't separate who we are, because we do belong a part of various communities, our external community, the community inside our professional jobs, and outside. So I actually encourage everyone to continue to think of our communities as being broader than just our external communities. Having the space and the opportunity to partner with others within an organization allows for, the opportunities to provide scholarships, to network with individuals across the country, to sponsor and mentor high school students trying to learn their paths. And that's what an organization like the AID organization, the National AID organization, actually did. When I went to the first national conference, being able to walk in a room full of energy professionals that look like me, that were in CEO suite positions, going back 11 years prior to this, it was something that I've never seen before. So having importance and giving value, letting organizations give value to some of these community-based organizations, not only help the community by the scholarships, the partnerships, but it also internally helps your employees develop and grow and feel welcomed and valued in their current roles. So, it took me joining an organization like this, becoming, the first woman president of the organization, being able to tie what I did at birth with my network, what I did throughout high school, networking with friends, and then feeling finally welcomed when I joined a professional organization. So I encourage you, and I would like you to start to think of the differences and the cycle of what the word networking is. And one thing that I want to finish with, Dr. Seward mentioned during her presentation about the stories that shape you. And when we go back to this slide right here, the networking cycle, this is a part of the story that shapes you. It's a part of the story that shapes your network. It's the part of the story that shapes your life and then leads into your professional life. So I'm gonna stop there and pass it over, but start to kind of change your mindset and think of how your community engagement ties into a lifelong circle. It's not just an endpoint, and I like the word process. It's an entire process.
Mhm, mhm. I love the examples and the graphs. I mean, Leticia, when you put this up there, I'm even envisioning, what my cycle would look like, what my school look like, and the questions, I put some in the chat, right? How does that lead to where you are? Like, if everyone had to answer that question, who's in your network? Who's a part of your network? How has it shaped your development as a person? And I think we saw some of the expectations for folks in the group chat earlier. We could definitely want to use this for ourselves. But if you are in charge of a team, if you're supervising others, if you are leading within your own organization or aspiring to do so, I think these are the points that you just raised, Leticia, is like, what about the person, if you're the one woman in your department, or that there's a colleague, or you're supervising the only person of color, or there's only a few folks of color? What are the professional spaces and places that they have the ability to tap into to help grow their ability to lead, to work on their professional development, to find peers? Those things are so, so important. And so if you're in HR, if you're thinking about hiring and recruitment, right, thinking about professional identities and social identities, thinking about networks, and how that is a form of community engagement is really, really critical to not just diversifying from a quantitative or numbers perspectives within your organization, but also thinking about the lack thereof for specific populations, right? And how can we do a better job of offering professional development opportunities to these individuals? Because that is critical to retaining, attracting, and keeping talented individuals, right? So powerful, powerful, powerful point. And on that note, we're gonna take it over to Dr. Sarah Jefferis, who's also another dear friend and colleague and leader in so many ways, to talk about what community engagement means and giving voice, and how she does a dynamic job of what she's doing in Ithaca, but also across the country. So Sarah, get ready for more notes, y'all. More notes.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm so happy to see all of you.
Megan Dorso, thank you. She just put in the chat. ERGs, which is the employee resource groups, that may be a name that's familiar to some, but those are definitely another space and place within organizations that are cultural, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation specific ways in which organizations are convening folks together to make sure that folks are establishing support systems. So great point, Megan. Is there something that so far this has you thinking? Is there a word or phrase that, at least from our first two presenters, that are just sticking with you that you're hoping to take away from today? I would say throw those in the chat. I wish maybe next year we'll do this in real life and in person, so that we can like clap and you can feel the reactions, and not like I'm over here just like geeking on all of this by myself, but I'm imagining that you all are too. So while we're waiting for Sarah to pull up her slides, definitely just put in the chat if there's some points that are also resonating with you.
I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I will pull them up in 1 second. Okay, so hi, I'm glad to be here. Thank you to the bank. Thank you to Johanna, Dr. Rogers. Thank you so much to everyone who has gathered today. This is what happens when you get a new computer and you learn to play with Zoom on it. Okay, so here we are. I will pull up the slides in just one second, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how leadership without intentional community engagement, leadership without compassionate, intentional, conscious community engagement is actually hollow and quite problematic. And the reason that I wanted to offer that idea up, the reason that I think that's important to say is that some of us may have developed a false belief. Y'all can all hear me, yes? Awesome. Some of us may have developed a false belief or coping mechanism that we can accomplish everything on our own. So if we have developed this belief or coping mechanism that we can accomplish everything on our own, I wanted to just say that perhaps that's a lie. Perhaps it tells everyone that what we will do all the work all of the time. Perhaps it tells other people that we don't value their contributions or their gifts, and that we don't trust them, and that their work is not good enough. And it also works against the 3 C's of community engagement, right? And those, of course, are collaboration, consultation, and communication. Collaboration, consultation, and communication. And, you know, I'm Dr. Jefferis. I teach writing at Cornell. I'm also the CEO of Right Now, a business that believes that writing is medicine, that writing is the thing that can help us move from places of conflict to places of collaboration. And whether it's an academic classroom at Cornell, or a creative writing workshop, or a different kind of writing workshop, we use writing as a healing modality, as an intentional strategy to create diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I believe it's necessary to create a safe space that is not divorced from the culture that has produced it, and a classroom or a workshop that articulates and acknowledges A, what the stereotypes are, while compassionately and consistently and collaboratively working together to create antidotes towards those stereotypes. And one could assert that intentional community engagement and anti-racist methods are some of those antidotes. You know, I strive to build a writing community where stereotypes are not the lens in which we use to see each other. They are not the lens in which we use to greet and work with each other. A space where we could be committed to finding the individual good within the collective, and a space that affirms the collective, a space where there are multiple leaders and not one leader. I really was touched by the point of humility brought up, and the point of asking, how are we networking with a group that creates diversity? And in this writing space, we can recognize each other's as leaders and remember that whoever is the guide, whoever is the facilitator, can lean into curiosity. And I think curiosity and community engagement go hand in hand. And the other thing I want to invite us to remember is that each one of us, when we come to the office, or we come to the workshop, or we come to the classroom, that we carry a community inside of us, right? And whether that is a community of our family, or a community of our culture, or a community of our geographies, or a community of our race, or a community of our religion, we carry multiple communities within our own selves. And how can we show up authentically, bringing those communities into the workspace? And we may not even see the communities that we carry. And so I've been thinking about this community engagement with communities outside of us, the communities we carry inside of us. And I've been thinking about leadership in relationship to that. And what occurred to me is that we all have leadership beliefs and we have limiting beliefs. And because I love writing, and some of you might like writing and some of you might not, and that's totally okay, I am going to invite us to do a really quick writing exercise. And in the writing, I'm going to ask how we can design, select, and sustain design, select, and sustain leadership beliefs, a leadership heart set, a leadership mindset that eradicates limiting beliefs. And I'm going to ask, what practices might we do in our daily lives to move towards those limiting, away from those limiting beliefs and towards leadership beliefs? So it's going to look like this. I'm going to ask you to take a piece of paper and divide it in 4 categories. This is on the slide too that I was trying to get up. And once I tell you the writing exercise, I'm going to try again to pull up the slide. I just don't have the multitasking ability to speak and pull up slides at the same time. So in your categories, you have a piece of paper. I'm going to ask you to divide it in 4. On the left-hand side, I'm going to ask you to write the word collaboration. In the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to ask you to write the word consultation. In the bottom left-hand corner, I'm going to ask you to write communication. So collaboration, consultation, communication. And then the bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to ask you to write mindset. So I'll just put those again in chat. So you have a piece of paper, you've divided it in 4. You've got collaboration in one corner. You've got consultation in the next. You have communication in the bottom left. And then you have mindset or heart set, right, in the top right. And I'm just going to ask you to take a few minutes to write in each category, in each square, to write those limiting beliefs that you hold for each one. And then to write a leadership belief underneath it. For example, I could have a collaboration limiting belief that I need to do the work all the time by myself. That could be my collaboration limiting belief, because I'm the only one who can get it done, because I'm the only one who knows how to do it, right? But a leadership belief around collaboration might be, if I believe in the gifts of my team, if I believe in the gifts of having a diverse team, what might they teach me that I don't know? Do y'all see the difference? One is that you're holding on to this belief, and one is a question. So if we remain in curiosity, what question or leadership belief can we arrive at? And how can we release our limiting beliefs?
I think we can open for question and answer, Sarah. And I think if folks are still working on their questions, I know there's some more things I want to jot down, but I think to open the floor and give folks some room, we have Sarah's presentation.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. So again, this is just my biography. This is really eradicating the individual leader mindset. The last thing I wanted to give you is 2 quotes. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. And the other one, of course, is Maya's. A wise woman wishes to be no one's victim. A wise woman refuses to be anyone's. It's really a wise woman refuses to be anyone's victim. Right. Which is really interesting, right? A wise woman refuses to be anyone's victim.
Powerful.
Yes, quite powerful. And this of course is right. The truth is collaboration, consultation, communication, and mindset. I think mindset is too limited of a word to place in this idea of community engagement in leadership. I believe we have to come with a heart set too. And that heart set really is, if I could just, connect back to the most beautiful other panelists, that heart set really is asking what stories shape you. That heart set is asking, how does your network diversify? That heart set is asking, what is your cycle of networking, right? Because in those stories and cycling and intention to diversify, we have collaboration, consultation, and communication, right? Thank you so much, Johanna.
No, thank you. This is a powerful way to bring together, and I thought I'm gonna stop sharing this in a minute, but Sarah, I think the words that you used here, a wise woman wishes to be no one's enemy. A wise woman refuses to be anyone's victim. And the idea of wishing and refusing, and the power that it takes, right, to stand up and speak, or to have boundaries, but also understand when those boundaries need to be pushed or sustained right in place where they are, right? But also thinking about the power of the collective. And I think each of our speakers today has really honed in on that collective part, that whole piece, making a whole lot out of pieces. And so I'm gonna pause. I have some questions, but I wanted to offer the opportunity. I know we've been pretty active in the chat, for anyone to come off and put their voice into the space and ask a question of our panelists, or something. I think I will jump in and ask the first question. I think you all didn't know each other starting before we got on today, but I think in listening to one another, was there something that really struck you about the topic that came from someone else that you hadn't even considered before?
I'll start. So when I heard the phrase socially trained introvert, I used to always coin myself as an extroverted introvert. And I started to realize or think about how that construct of, it's a blessing to be socially trained, to be able to respond in certain environments, to be able to speak up. But does that construct of forcing, I don't want to say forcing because training can be a good thing, but forcing myself to be that extrovert, because the belief is that people don't necessarily listen to introverts because you kind of internalize a lot of what you do. Am I authentically being myself, or have I changed how I am authentic based upon what I have learned over the years? So that gave me a lot of thought and insight, and I still haven't figured that out myself.
Powerful. And it also reaffirms like what a leader looks like, right? Like, and who is a leader, and what way is it socially acceptable to be a leader in ways that make people uncomfortable, right? And folks that aren't oftentimes as vocal or wanting to be at the front of the room, it's hard for people to understand, right? What it is you're thinking, or it's continued. Like, we need folks that want to talk, so we know exactly what you're thinking, so we know exactly where to place you, we know exactly how to make sure that you're saying the right things. When sometimes it is the person, are we thinking about leadership in ways that help us understand the value of the folks that are working off stage, right? The folks that are putting the lights in, the folks that show up and make sure the box office is operating so people can buy tickets. Are we thinking about all the ways in which leaderships can show up in the way that women serve, right? It's anyone else. We have folks in the chat saying that, yes, that really resonates with them and her. Go ahead, Simone.
I just wanted to comment on the socially trained extrovert, because like I said, like, I'm an introvert at heart. People don't think that, but for me, through my years of training and through my years of engagement, like, that was a huge struggle for me. I was like, I'm not a public speaker. I don't want to get up in front of people. Like, I don't want to engage. but it made me so uncomfortable, but that I had to learn how to, as I've heard this phrase used before, doing it afraid, which so resonates with me because a lot of times, you know, and I have severe imposter syndrome, but like having that training and having that ability to then being able to get out of my comfort zone and, you know, be uncomfortable in certain spaces and situations forced me to really adapt and adjust while still being my authentic self. But I learned a different part of myself, right? Like I learned that, yes, it is important for me to be able to be social. And my husband is, I say, an extreme introvert where he gets to the point where he has social minutes, where he's like, look, I am like, we have 4 events that we want to go to. I want to do this, and he's like, look, pick one of those because I have limited social minutes. And I'm like, well, geez, thanks. So I just wanted to share that, you know, that was literally something that happened over time. And again, it was a process that really I can attribute to my community engagement, you know, process. And even with the pandemic, like I was still reaching out to people like, hey, I need energy. Like even with the Zoom calls we used to have, I'm like, I need energy. I need to see faces. So over time, I've adapted to being able, you know, to draw energy from others as well, which also keeps me motivated, which is one of the things that we talked about in the chat too. Like, why do you enter into spaces for community engagement? For me, some days I need motivation. I need to understand and to recognize that, you know what I'm doing means something to the people out there, because right now I'm having a bad day, but I can reach out to my social network. I can reach out to the people from who I really draw strength, motivation, and energy. So I just wanted to kind of throw that back out there. And also talking about the writing process for, you know, Sarah, that also has been a huge, like, storytelling is also kind of my area of, you know, love and passion. So being able to tell your story, to write it down, to, you know, publish works of art and beauty, and having people, you know, tell you, oh, this is really inspiring, this resonates with me. Like it gives you not a sense of accomplishment, but it feels like, yes, I shared this out of fear. I might have been afraid to share it, but it helped someone, and it helped, you know, me also feel like I'm not the only one, you know, struggling with this. And it helps, again, build that community. So the writing piece, I absolutely love. And I used to journal, and I've recently started journaling again, because there's just so many thoughts and feelings that go on in my head and in my heart that I have to get it out, I have to put it down on paper. So I applaud the writing, the journaling aspects of the work.
We have a question in the chat from Kelly. Imposter syndrome. Do you all think you were uniquely socially conditioned conditioned and positioned to experience this? Great question, Kelly. Do you all think women are uniquely socially conditioned, positioned to experience imposter syndrome?
Absolutely. I'll jump in wholeheartedly on this topic. When we're born as beautiful women, we're told what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do it, kids, no kids, taking care of the household. Oh, and then when we broke into the professional environment, oh, we need to be women bosses, but you can't take care of your family. You can't have to take off work to take your child to a school play. You can't take mental time for yourself. So what do? We compartmentalize what we think we need to be, who we think we need to be. Even as women leaders, we were socially and professionally told, you need to be stern to be a woman leader. You need to speak up. The words of, you know, one thing that always got, that I hated was words identified with women as being emotional in the workplace, being aggressive, being difficult, being bossy. When our counterparts, at times, these words aren't looked as negatively towards them as it is for us women. Instead of being called aggressive, they're called assertive. Pat on the back. You're great. You're assertive. You're an assertive, man. woman, you're too aggressive, you're too mean, you're too this. So with all of that said, we are taught to be a certain way if we want to lead, be a certain way if we want to be successful. And I believe that's where a lot of times imposter syndrome come in, because we want to be successful, we want to be wonderful mothers, we want to be wonderful wives, maids, leaders of the household, but we also want to be authentic in who we are. And that's how we seep into being that imposter syndrome, which is a cycle, you know, day by day from my personal experience.
I just jump in on that real quick.
Yeah.
Both of them, I was thinking about both of them. I was touched too by the importance of telling a story, right? And also I was thinking about how imposter syndrome is part of those limiting beliefs. And the imposter doesn't see failure as a normal part of life. And a strong woman collaborative leader sees failure as a step to success, as part of the piece of success. And so I've been thinking about how imposter syndrome, it's really easy to seep into us as women, and it's easy to agree that we are somehow the imposter, that we are somehow the fraud, right? But in fact, possibly the imposter is that we are trying to play small. The imposter is that we are actually strong and fierce and powerful beyond our measure, larger than our imagination. And it feels like we may be found out. That fear and that tension and that self-doubt is around believing that we are small, right? And in fact, we are actually not small, right? So imposter syndrome sometimes feels like ether. I think it doesn't make a space for failure. And I think as soon as we begin to say, okay, I'm going to lean into this thing called failure. I'm going to lean into this thing called mistakes. I'm going to lean into this thing like, oh, I got a new computer and I can't share these slides, but somehow I was able to share them at 8:15, right? Like I'm going to lean into those mistakes, if we call them that, and still see my own wealth and value and contribution, right? But the imposter syndrome is an all or nothing thinking that says, if we fail, we're done, right? And it creates that tension, of course, of what people think of us and what we think of ourselves. So it's very hard, and I struggle with it all the time. And I also believed that education would eradicate it.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't at all. And so I love it when strong, powerful leaders who are women say, yeah, I still have imposter syndrome. I'm still working on this thing called failure. I'm still working on this belief that I have to be perfect, right? Because perfectionism, of course, is working inside of imposter syndrome. And the idea that there is a fraud that will be found out is connected to this idea that something has to be perfect.
Right.
Right. So if we eradicate perfectionism and we eradicate this idea of mistakes as not being a part of the path, and we push at this word fraud, we might be able to unravel the hooks of imposter syndrome.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. This is, oh gosh, thinking that we are small. I'm quite sure we probably could go on for another 45 minutes. Ashley, I'm not sure if that's a hand saying like you have a question. We're going to take Ashley's question. And
I do, yes, thank you. So thank you ladies so much for this. I did have a question because you had talked about, you know, having allies in this and having people who say, okay, if you are a female, I work in a very male dominated industry, especially in the position that I'm in. It's a sales role. It is a communicating with clients role. generally males are doing this. If it's something that I'm doing, or if I'm asking for something, again, if a male is doing it, they're assertive. If I'm doing it, I'm aggressive. How do you avoid that? Or what is your response when people are saying, okay, well, you're aggressive? Do you go back and say, no, I'm being assertive, I'm doing exactly what my counterparts would do? Do you find an ally to speak with you or on behalf of you? What do you guys do with that?
I guess I'll jump in. I'm still learning how to navigate that. And a lot of times I just make sure to speak up on assertive versus aggressive. Or sometimes I will actually say, well, what makes you say that? What actions are you seeing that is allowing you to identify with that? Oh, really? That's what you see that way? Well, how which way do you think it should be done? Because I have seen our team has been successful in doing some of these things. So what would you advise? It's being a little bit sarcastic, but not, it doesn't come across as sarcastic, but it may also be a shared learning opportunity of, okay, maybe there are ways that you shouldn't have to change who you are, what you're doing to exercise that action. But maybe there are actions that aren't necessarily aggressive in a learning developmental standpoint, but if someone else is doing it and you're telling me that this isn't the right thing to do, then that's a conversation we need to have.
I love that. Thank you. So my thought with that too is people see women and they immediately equate that with emotional. And so they need to take a step back and say, okay, so instead of saying that they're being aggressive, they're taking the same approach as this. Take the emotion out of it, take the ego out of it, and just let it be what it is. And let us genuinely be those leaders that we want to be.
I will add my favorite go-to phrase is help me to understand. Okay, so again, putting the question back on them and having them explain to you, okay, what is it that you think, I'm doing that is aggressive or, not assertive, or how would you interpret? Is there another way to interpret what I'm doing or how I'm feeling? So I always put the question back on them. Help me understand, or I'm struggling to understand. Could you help me, go-to phrase?
That's excellent. Thank you so much.
If I can just jump on that real quick, I get called aggressive often. And so for me, the first thing I had to do was tend to myself, right? Like, okay, so how does that land for me, right? Personally, separately from the person who is saying that, because it's a very similar thing. I'll do a similar action to a male counterpoint and then be called aggressive and he'll be called assertive. And sometimes in the conversation, I want to point that out, right? Like, talk to me about this relationship between the word, because I live on the word level, right? Like, talk to me about what feels aggressive to you and what feels assertive. I have been known in meetings to put both on the board and ask people to brainstorm and to get taught a conversation about the similarities and differences of those words and where we give permission to be one or the other. The other question that I often lean into, besides help me understand, is I'm curious about how that word and that moment of calling me that leads us to the outcome. Like, I get very focused on, like, we are here to make this sale, or we are here to arrive at this outcome. And you pausing to say my action is aggressive, does that bring us to the end goal that we're supposedly supposed to be doing together, right? Depending on the community and the time and the goal and the stress of the situation, and whether or not I think they will hear me, if it's a group or an individual, I either lean towards, like, let's talk about those words, or I say, can we get the outcome done? And then I'll come back and have a one-on-one with that person. But first and foremost, I had to do some work on me. Like, okay, am I going to be okay being called aggressive or assertive? Right? Like, am I going to be okay with that? Because the idea of calling me aggressive is usually to slow me down. Right? or to remind me that I'm somehow stepped out of my place. And so I asked myself, like, did I step out of my place? Whatever that place might be. And was my behavior of harm with someone, or was it in collaboration with? What was the impact? Because I want to, as a white woman, pay attention to the impact of my action and be really clear if I'm called aggressive, right? To think about that impact. But I also want to know with that person what their focus and goal was in saying that. So I feel like it's contextual, like my response is contextual. But I also had to do some work on it for myself.
Go ahead.
Thank you. If I may, I just would love you to expand on that thought there, Sarah. And by the way, my name is Lizette. My name. When you're in a situation where a male counterpart is engaging in what we all understand as mansplaining, you know, what kind of, what could you kind of describe a little bit more how you handle a situation like that? Because a lot of what you're saying really felt like it applied, but if it could be fine-tuned a little bit to a situation like that, that would be very interesting to hear your perspective.
I'm curious to know if my counterparts on the panel would like to jump in too, before I jump in.
It's all yours, because I still struggle with that, especially being, you know, married, and a lot of times I know the mates in the household do that as well. So I'm all ears. I'm taking my notes on this one.
Yeah, I'm saying, because first I always have to, Sarah, like you said, check yourself. I have to check my face, because 9 times out of 10, I'm like, I just said that. So I literally have to work on my face first, and then
I'm not a panelist. Go ahead, Sarah.
No, Johanna, go ahead.
we need pointers here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think in this conversation, I had to contextualize some things, and I often reflect on how I show up. And so I'm 6'3", and I often am, I don't know, Leticia, you've known me for a long time, and I'm just like, I've always been put in this position where I'm this assumed leader, but then sometimes as I've grown and gotten to more male-dominated spaces, it's like that silencing still happens. And so I've had this reaction of like, did y'all just hear what I said? Because I think, and I call it out. I call it out. I don't try to fix my face. Or I will often say, I don't need a pep talk. You know, because sometimes this mansplaining things happen. I'm like, that is not the question that I asked. And I'm not asking for encouragement, right? Because that's not what I need right now. What I'm asking you is, but I think sometimes it's my demeanor and show up that gives me the privilege or position to say that. But everybody may not be in that place. But I do think, and this is some of the mentoring that I've had, sometimes we double down on the notion because we try to find a way to address it without being direct. And I have found that being direct and calling it out, yes, it's going to make them feel uncomfortable. But when Sarah was talking at one point, I put back up the quote from Maya Angelou, and I'll share it again, because we're not trying to be an enemy, but I refuse to be your victim. And that is such a powerful idea. And I think it takes courage, like a serious amount of like badassness or courage to really reinforce where our boundaries are, right? And I think when it comes into these situations with mansplaining, it's one in which we're trying to tiptoe or we're trying to be considerate. And I'm just like, y'all, no, stop doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, one strategy is to be direct, right? Absolutely. I think, again, it's contextual. I've been direct in certain places, and then You know, one of the stories I was going to tell is I used to be a McNair advisor at Cornell. And I had direct moments with my boss. And then I was politely asked into meetings about why I was being so direct, right? And so I think it's strategy about what position you're in and where you can be direct, and what will be the benefit and what will be the cost, right? And to whom you can be more direct with and to whom you need to be less direct with. I mean, that's not to counter anything Johanna said. I think the direct approach is always my go-to. But I want to be clear, right? Because I also have, when I say I check myself, like I don't have a poker face. Like you will see what I feel right there, right? So when I check myself, it's sometimes like to check my heart, right? Because I'm like, dang, that hurt, right? So sometimes it's to check my heart, even if I don't change my face. I'm also thinking about, I feel like you asked for strategies. I put in the chat, there's an amazing book that I worked with one of my clients called A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space by Eliza Van Court, that has a lot of strategies in it. But one strategy that I often use, and I know this might sound weird, is when I'm in a situation, someone is mansplaining, I will start writing some of their quotes down, right? Just to like focus and to not feel like I'm gonna lose my mind. So I'll write a few things down that they're saying. And then when I'm ready to jump in, I may jump in on one of those points and say, when you said this, help me to understand, right? So I try to create that dialogue. The other thing is mansplaining has this weird, expansive time to it. Like suddenly, I don't know about y'all, but suddenly I feel like time won't, like, it just goes on and on and on. And I'm watching like the tasks I need to do. And I'm like, okay, this is taking way too long, right? Would you all agree? Do y'all ever feel that way with mansplaining? Yeah. And so I've been thinking about that, is how to politely say, I need to go do this task now. I need to go do this here. Or can we put a pin in that, right? And come back to it later, because there's something about mansplaining that feels like it sucks energy and it sucks time and it just sucks a lot of language and space out of me. Yeah. And so if I can say, can we put a pin in that? Or the opposite strategy of like, if I'm going to be willing to engage in this conversation, can we engage in this one part? Right. The other thing about mansplaining I find is that some of that language that I'm writing down feels so crazy or so wild that if I say, when you said X, and I repeat it back to them, they're like, oh, I said that. Like sometimes they have this moment of hearing it again, right? And then the third strategy of whether it's like, can I put a pin in it? Can I offer you back in a listening way what you said, is just really leaning into curiosity. Right? You know, why does this person feel like they're needing to say all of that right now? And also leaning into curiosity to me, right? Like, why is this getting on my nerves so much, right? Like, what is this bringing up in me? Because I really believe that every dialogue and every interaction, there's a lesson. Right? So the men that have mansplained to me, often later I'll check about like who they reminded me of or what personal work I need to do. Because sometimes it's not even about what they're saying. I don't know if that helps. But that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. We are over time, but I'm so excited that more than half of us are still here, and it just reinforces the importance of having this conversation. Thank you, Berkshire Bank, for supporting this work. As you're seeing in the chat, and for those listening, you know, the question is, how can we do this in person? And so Kelly, I'm looking at Kelly like this may be one of the things that we just really need to focus on and hone in for the next year to come. Because I want you all to just put in the chat what you're feeling right now, a word, a phrase, something to just let us know as a thank you to our panelists, affirmations into the conversation that was just had. Just put a word or phrase or something that's just on your heart right now. Because I think part of what I'm taking away from this session today is that my whole person needs attention. So thank you, Dr. Seward, for my professional identity and my work identity. Leticia, thank you so much for talking about and helping us reflect on how our networks can sustain us, how maybe what has informed us as women or allies, but also how our support networks has provided opportunities and can hold us in communities, both internal and externally. Sarah, Dr. Jefferis, thank you so much for reminding us about our mindsets and our heart sets and the 3 C's of community engagement: curiosity, carrying, and collaboration. Those were the C's that I took away. It is really, really, really an honor and a pleasure for me to host this space. Thank you all for showing up. For those that are looking for DEI training at a minimal cost for you or your team within your organizations, and more information about registration and all of that will be coming out. And so please, please, please continue to support myself, Amina, and the team in leading this work. And thank you all for being here today.